Welcome to Becoming Parents Podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Campbell. I'm a doula in Washoe County, Nevada, a Medicaid provider, a lactation educator, childbirth educator, and mom of 18. You can find me and connect on doulainreno.com. Remember, give a shout out to those who are brave enough to share their stories with us on how they have become parents. Let's dive in. Welcome to Becoming Parents Podcast. I'm the host, Jennifer Campbell. Today I'm with Emily Cleghorn. How are you today?
I'm well. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to have you. I think there's so many things that women don't talk about. This is
Mhm.
really a huge one, and I'm not sure if I've had anyone talk about this specifically, but I want you to start by sharing your parenting journey.
Yeah, so I became a mama in 2018. Um, my rainbow baby was born, so there was a previous miscarriage. Um, and when she was born, I went into it thinking it's been 25-ish years since my really traumatic childhood.
Mm.
Time and space have kind of made that null and void, and I can just go on with my life. It didn't.
Sorry.
I love that laugh because I would give myself that laugh now had if I could go back and be like, you know what, you are you are ridiculous because my daughter was the catalyst for realizing that I had a lot, and when I say a lot, I'm being really generous, of healing to do.
Mhm.
She brought it all to the surface because as a baby, she looked like baby me. So I'm sitting there looking back at an infant that looks like I did as an infant. And as adorable as that can be, it's also immensely triggering because all of the stuff came up. And so my parenting journey started out really, really, really rough.
Mm.
Um, because until I had met my husband, I didn't want kids because I knew I didn't want to repeat the past.
Right.
And I had lived a really traumatic childhood, and I didn't want to repeat that because no child on this earth deserves to live that existence. None. Um, and so if I had the choice between repeating the past or not having kids, I chose no kids,
I get
not
that.
realizing that, I can make changes, but that took me a while to realize because
Yeah.
I thought I was confined by the choices made by other people in my childhood. And so that realization was huge. And it wasn't until I had that realization that I was like, oh, wait, the cloud of fear that is over me, the cloud of, well, it was really much deeper than fear. It was in trepidation. Like I was
Yep.
terrified, terrified because for me, going into motherhood was very tricky because mothers were not a safe place. And so now I was a mother.
Wow.
So, that's really deep.
It's
But
interesting because I
yeah,
came from a really dysfunctional upbringing too. And I was like, I'm going to change the world and do everything different. And it's going to be great, which is also stupidly naive.
mhm.
You and I came into this with completely opposing thought processes. And it doesn't matter. You can't leave your baggage behind. You just,
No, it doesn't. It follows you, and you have
yeah,
to, to, the only way through it is to feel it. And
yeah.
that was scary. That was really scary. So, I started out battling my internal narrative of you've got to get the heck out of here because it's not safe, like for my nervous system. And hold up, if you leave, you're repeating the past.
Mm.
and you don't want to do that. So, I decided to stay and face it, not knowing what that would entail. And so, um, it led me to a really dark place where I cried out to God and I was like, okay, I need your help to get through this because I can't handle it. And if you can help me through this, I will put my hand back into the fire and help other mamas because I know I'm not the only one who's had this experience. I know I'm not the only one. I feel like I'm the only one, but I
Yeah.
know that I'm not. There are other mamas who are desperately trying to keep their heads above water, trying to beat their past, and their past is beating them down. And so if you can help me get through this and get me through to the other side of the fire, I will help them. And that's where this whole mamahood after trauma journey started. My own healing journey, and then also paying it forward to other
Mhm.
mamas who can, who know that there's a better way, who know that
Yeah.
this doesn't have to be their life, like their childhood doesn't have to control their life, but they don't know how to get out of it because, when you're in the middle of the forest, you can't see your way out through the
Yeah.
trees sometimes. So, um, yeah, that's where I've started, and it's been a whole lot of nervous system recovery.
Go back and tell me, you got pregnant, you miscarried that first time. Was
Yeah,
that, did that start a cascade of triggers? Because there's the miscarriage itself. Well, there's getting pregnant for you. I would say that
yeah,
that's a first trigger. And then losing a baby, which could be even a relief in this situation, because you weren't sure you wanted to do this thing. And then getting pregnant a second time, and there's that whole rainbow baby. So I'm thinking of the things that a lot of women have to navigate through in their nervous system that creates fear or trepidation, in
yeah,
in your nervous system. So what were those pieces like before you looked at the spitting image of you looking back, which again, I get that is terrifying when the baby's actually here in your arms. I saw a couple yesterday for a postpartum visit, and they were like, it was so surreal going to the postpartum room and having the nurse be like, okay, bye, you got this, and everybody walking out of the room like, seriously, I need a license to get a fish
I
and you're
d-
leaving me alone with a baby. Like, what are you doing? Don't leave me. I am
I
not
don't got
equipped.
this. I don't got
I
this.
don't
Please
got
don't
this.
leave.
And this was in a very planned, educated, they had their act together, and still it's really common for us in postpartum to be like, hold on. So like I have to do this now? I have to do this thing. But you're dealing with a different set of trauma at the same
Hmm.
time. So take me through a little bit more of like miscarriage, loss, those feelings, and then getting pregnant that second time also, because that's, I don't want to
Yeah.
over that.
Yeah. So I think it's really important to let listeners know that when I started on my fertility journey, I was going in with the mindset that my body hates me and it's working against me.
Mm.
And that comes from years of feeling like everything was working against me. Like I couldn't get my head above water. And
Mm.
so like my medical team, my doctor wouldn't listen to me. Emily, it's all in your head. And meanwhile, I knew there was
Mm.
something wrong. And I had problems with my cycle from like teen years.
Yes.
Crazy, crazy painful. And it actually took me educating myself on what my cycle was supposed to look like and comparing what a normal, and I use that term lightly, normal cycle looks like, a healthy cycle versus what mine was doing. And so, I was doing ovulation tests and all of this stuff, um,
Mm.
and discovered that I was having anovulatory cycles. So,
Okay.
my doctor put me on Clomid, and that put my body in a headlock, forced me to ovulate so that I achieved pregnancy, but it didn't support my body with progesterone production. So I miscarried the baby. And then
Right.
immediately after that miscarriage happened, I was scheduled to have a doctor's appointment with my OB. And just before I got in the car to drive the 6 hours to my doctor, they called and canceled the appointment. I was like, but I need to see her. I
Mhm.
had a miscarriage. I need to see her. Oh, no, you're fine. Keep taking your medication. I hung up the phone. I was absolutely devastated because my doctor didn't care.
Yep.
And I was like, that's her job. Her job is to care. And so I I hung up the phone. I was devastated, but I was also really, really, really ticked off. Like I was fiery. And I was like, okay, I'm not taking another one of those stupid pills, first of all, and I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to figure out how to support my body the way that it needed to be supported. And so I found myself a naturopath. I marched myself to the naturopath's office after a few really dark weeks because my body was against me and God took my baby before I could even hear its heartbeat.
Mm.
And um, I sat down in the naturopath's office and he's like, tell me your story. And that was the first time in my life where somebody of a medical background sat and listened to my story. And he was like, well, Emily, this is what's happening. Your stress response has been stuck in the on position for years. If your stress response is on,
Mhm.
your fertility is off.
Right. Your body's protecting itself.
Absolutely. So we have to support your body to get it to relax.
Hmm.
I was like, okay. So I did what he recommended, and uh I went to see him the weekend of November 11th, and by December 19th, I had a positive pregnancy test.
And Clomid, like medications can force your body to do something it doesn't want to do, but that doesn't mean the
Yeah.
outcome. Yeah,
Yeah.
I totally get that. Forcing it's not always the answer. But being
No.
heard, I mean, don't you feel like from getting your period, I always think, why are we embarrassed to put tampons on the conveyor belt at the grocery
At the
store? Like
grocery store, yeah.
we're 50% of the population ish. We should, all of us are either going to or have had a period. Like, why can we not have a conversation from that all the
Hmm.
way through menopause? Like, and everything in
Yeah.
between. Why do women not feel heard? And you, I mean, fortunately, in your situation, you did a lot of the research that you
Yeah.
needed to make yourself maybe feel sane. Like, well, this is not in my, why is this not being addressed? Is this all in my head? So that you could find the right practitioner who saw you. I mean, we just want
Yeah.
somebody to see us, right?
Yeah.
It shouldn't take that much, but good for you because it often does take that much. So you got pregnant. And was this now, this is a different, this is a different Emily from I don't want to have kids because I don't want to be a parent. After that loss and going through that and not feeling heard, you were becoming more of an advocate for yourself and recognizing your
Yeah.
stress responses. That's a
Yeah.
much different place.
Oh, it is. Um, but it was just the tip of the iceberg. It was the very, very tip of the iceberg. And so, um, after I got that positive pregnancy test, there was a lot of educating. Okay, so what
Mhm.
what do I need to know about keeping my baby safe in utero and out? And how do I protect her? How do I keep her healthy? Because there are things out there that are not that are sold to us as healthy that aren't. And there's so much information. So I did a lot of self-educating, but never with regards to how my trauma would impact my postpartum.
Okay, so that's a difference. I'm glad that we went back and kind of went through that process, because here we are now, right? Postpartum with a baby, where it's like, are you actually leaving me alone in this room that most of us experience? Like I'm supposed to
Yeah.
do all, I don't even know what to do, that we kind of muddled through, but it was a trigger to your trauma that
Oh
you
yeah.
had already been working through with your stress
Hmm.
responses. So definitely jump in. And also, I know I'm not asking you to speak for your husband, but he was a big part of this too. Like, I'm
Yeah.
sure I'm sure you were having conversations because you were talking about your stress response, but you don't know the trauma and triggers that are going to hit you until they do, usually.
Yeah.
So definitely jump in there and take us through some of that.
Yeah. So for the first, I don't know, 2 months postpartum, I I was quiet. I didn't let anybody in on what I was dealing with because I was afraid that my husband was going to abandon me because I'm a bad mom,
Mm.
which wasn't true. He ever say anything of the sort to give me any idea of the sort. That was my nervous system on the alert. Like, Emily, you've been abandoned before. Don't let him in. Don't let him see. And he won't abandon us like everybody else has. And so, like, he knew something was up. And he kept
Mhm.
asking me, but I wouldn't let him in because, I was a I was a sobbing mess. Just randomly, I would just start crying and he'd be like, "What's wrong, dear?" I was like, "Nothing, nothing, I'm fine." Clearly, I was not fine. Um,
But anytime, just side note, anytime a woman says fine, definitely sit down, pull up a chair. We're not fine. None of us is fine. If we use that word, something's gone sideways. Right. You are not fine. Did you
Yeah,
feel like it was hard to, I mean, I understand the fear of him leaving you, or the fear of you becoming your mother. I get both of those. Was there, was it hard to find your voice too? Was it hard to even know what to express and how to,
yeah,
and
I
then the guilt of expressing it?
I felt incredibly guilty for how I was feeling. And I thought that if I said it out loud, would make it more real. And I didn't want it to be real. And so I guess in some respects, I was in denial. And it took me a
Yeah.
long time to, break down and let him in. And it was actually on a Saturday afternoon. We were driving home from getting groceries, and I was looking out the window, sobbing, which at that point was fairly normal for me because I had been sobbing randomly for the past 2 months. And he goes, "What's wrong with you?" Like,
Yeah.
I was like, "I hate being a mom," because I didn't realize it at that point, but being a mom was unsafe for
Hmm.
me because of my experience of mothers. And he was kind of dumbfounded by it. I was like, "Don't get me wrong, I love our daughter. I love her more than anything in this world, but I hate being a mom." And he's like, "Okay, so how do we fix this? How do we get through this?"
Mm. Wow, good for him. I think postpartum is one of the most under, just people don't talk about, not talk about, but also there's no support. You don't have an OB appointment for 6 weeks. You go to the
Yeah.
pediatrician, the pediatrician's wondering, why are parents asking me about postpartum depression or postpartum anything, or if they can go back to the gym and lift something, or how far can they walk? Like, it's a pediatrician, right? But we don't, there's no one in the interim. And then we have a 15-minute appointment with our OB. I just think it's so swept under the rug how
Yes.
challenging postpartum is. As a doula, hyper focus on that support because I know how hard it's hard and you feel alone. And let's just say there's 20 side effects, symptoms of postpartum you can get. We'll all get 7, but I have no idea what 7 you're going to get. You kind of
Hmm.
have to wait till you're there to see. So good for your husband because nobody talks about how hard you're supposed to fall in love with your baby, be a great mom, latch them on, go be a great mom. That's basically the message. Don't go back to work and don't be a stay-at-home mom because both of those you're going to get put down for. But definitely
Absolutely.
latch that baby on and be happy and do a great job. But there's no conversation about that. So good for you for finally speaking up and good for him with no information saying, what do we need to do?
Yeah.
And then what?
Then I found a therapist because we were living pretty rurally in
Okay.
north northwestern Alberta. Um, and so there was no therapist in the community. So I found a therapist that I could do Zoom calls with, did a few sessions to help me um, differentiate where the boundaries were, where I started and where I stopped, and where my daughter started and where my mom stopped, because all of those lines were blurred.
Right.
And so understanding that, my mom made her choices when I was a baby, and those were the right choices for her, but I don't have to make those same choices. I can make my own choices. And my daughter is going to live her own childhood. She's not doomed to live the same childhood that I experienced. And so we're all walking our own journeys. And
Mhm.
sure, my mom's journey has impacted mine, and I will impact my daughter, and my daughter impacts me, but we each walk our own journey and we can create it for ourselves.
Right.
And that was so powerful for me. It lifted such a huge weight off of my shoulders that um, was crippling.
I felt like, mm, I think sometimes people want to do it differently, but they go in the other direction too. Like this person
Yeah.
was super domineering, so like a helicopter parent and abusive. So I'm going to be the total opposite, thinking that will fix it when really it's finding that middle ground. And also, I think my oldest daughter's 32 now, my oldest biological daughter. And I remember thinking, holy crap, I'm still like living and creating my story while I'm trying to
Hmm.
create her story. And sometimes they don't line up real well because we get sick, we have
Hmm.
loss, we have trauma, we have ended relationships, we have insert thing here that happens in our
Yeah.
story that affects our kids' story. But
Hmm.
we don't mean to. I thought like if I'm a great mom and I try hard every day, my kids won't have trauma from my parenting and that's crap. Like it doesn't matter how
Yeah.
great of a parent you are. I traumatized my own kids even though that was never my intent and it wasn't abuse or neglect or any of those things. Um Still we're human living our own story trying to figure this out as we go and that was a
Yeah.
surprise to me, I think.
Yeah. It's very, it's interesting because like the more you focus on what you don't want, the more
Mm,
you go in that direction. It's like, don't look at the side of the road when you're trying to drive straight because eventually you're going to veer off the road. Be careful what you focus on
yep.
because eventually, unintentionally or not, you're going to start to veer that direction. And so for me, what I did was I acknowledged, I went back so that I could go forward. I acknowledged what the effect that I experienced of those actions were. And I tried to acknowledge the humanness of all of the adults in my childhood.
Hmm.
Um, and what was the intention or the story behind the actions? Because as kids, we don't have that background knowledge. We don't have the ability to understand it. We don't have the scope to wrap our little minds around it. But as an adult, we can look back and be like, oh, well, mom didn't have the best mom either. And so she was trying to work through her trauma and she didn't mean to, but she really hurt me. And it's not to negate the actions or the hurt that you experienced, but it lends some compassion and humanness to to your parent who maybe intentionally or unintentionally caused you trauma.
I know when I became a parent for the first time, I lost respect for my parents in some ways because then I knew the love that I would feel after
Hmm.
giving birth to this human being. I felt like how could these things happen if this is how that love
Hmm.
started out? And also you have a lot of grace for them because you realize as you're muddling through your own parenting journey and it's not easy. And I've watched my kids struggle with this too. Um, you realize that you're part of the problem. So um, all those things are true. So I remember thinking, wow, I've lost respect and I have grace. Two very opposing
Yes.
feelings towards my own parents. And I understand that I'm part of my children's problem as I'm raising them, trying to do a really great job. I think sometimes there's abuse and neglect, drug use. There are certain things, though, that are above and beyond. Like you are not being a
Yes.
parent if you're making these choices. And so there's a point where there's grace and there's a point where there's a lack of respect. And I think we all have to muddle through it. But you're right. I mean, I definitely, having a child and muddling through it, realized that my mother had a story, my father had a story. They were trying to
Hmm.
figure their story out. They didn't do a very good job, but there were times I didn't
Yeah.
either. And it's just what level that is. So
Yeah.
moving forward from this and working through this, you created a business.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
did exactly what you said. God, if you can help me through this, I'll help others. And I interview almost only exclusively entrepreneurs, and 100% of people I interview, they birthed their business through their struggle, and they
Hmm.
did it in huge part because they wanted to make it faster, easier, and more supported for someone else going through something similar. And you are an excellent example of that.
Well, yeah, I mean, when I was in that really dark period after my daughter was born and I was looking for support, I couldn't find what it was that I needed. I couldn't find what I needed. There's trauma support, there's parenting support, but
Hmm.
there's no parenting after trauma support. And so there was a hole and I was like, okay, I guess this is where we're going. So, um, because nobody was really talking about how having a child can be, it's such a blessing, but it's also such a trigger. Like
Oh, yeah.
your child is a mirror. And so whether or not you want to acknowledge that they are being a mirror, um, but they are pointing out the areas in us that are calling for us to nurture them, to heal them, to make them whole again. And sometimes you need the support, well, actually, all the time, you need
Mhm.
the support of a mama who is going through their trauma recovery journey, if that's what you're doing, because others may not have the perspective or understanding that you need.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, motherhood is hard. Trauma recovery is hard. But when you're doing them both at the same time, it's more hard.
Really hard. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's more hard. It's way more hard. You have a podcast, you have a book, and I have the link to the book. I have a link to your website where people can find the podcast. You have
Yeah.
also, tell me if this is something that people can download. It's the trigger toolkit. Is that a download or is that part of
S-
coaching?
So, I have my freebie, which is called Mama Untriggered. So there are bits and pieces of your trigger toolkit inside of that
Okay.
freebie. And then there's there's more in the works coming up in the next couple of months, November, December. Before the end of 2024, there will be so many more resources available on
Okay.
my website. So yeah.
Tell me if you were to give, because this has been amazing and hard. These are hard conversations. If if you were to give somebody one piece of advice that would start them on their journey, I know we have your website, your book, your podcast.
hmm
We have those resources. You have more coming. So we have that. But separately from that, what is the one thing you either would have told your younger self or that you would tell someone else that they can do as a first step? What would that be?
Get curious.
Oh, oh, I
Get
love
curious.
that.
Get curious about why you react to things the way you do. And not for judgment's sake. Like you're not judging yourself and condemning yourself, but ask yourself, okay, so why why did I react to that situation in that way?
Mm.
And what can you learn about yourself that you don't already know? Get curious.
Emily, I adore you. I've loved our conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.